Why didn't the Rebel Alliance use any battle droids to fight against the tyranny of the Empire? Greetings, and welcome back to the Archives. One of the biggest problems the Rebellion faced during the Galactic Civil War was a lack of numbers and firepower against the seemingly invincible Empire. Their seemingly endless numbers. The new regime was centralized as a galactic government, commanding a powerful navy and an even stronger infantry group. With both the Imperial Army and the Stormtrooper Corps at the Emperor's disposal, the Rebellion very rarely engaged the enemy in open battle unless they had a series of terrestrial advantages. Not to mention, the Alliance just didn't have the numbers to fight the Empire head-on. They were outgunned, outmanned, outexperienced. So with all of that, why did the Rebellion not reactivate some of the old B1 and B2 battle droids to throw at the Stormtroopers? What about them made them untouchable? There was a time when the Rebel starfighter Wedge Antilles did this exact same thing on Geonosis, and he successfully wiped out an entire legion of Stormtroopers. So why didn't he bring back the battle droids to the Rebellion and pose that they reactivate the old factories? Well, my friends, in today's video we are going to be looking at some of the old tactical displays and discussing why the Rebellion was actually genius for not using the battle droids to fight against the Empire. At first though, we have to talk about why on the surface it seems genius to reactivate the battle droids. After the destruction of the Death Star, all the Empire's sights were on the Rebel Alliance, something that they had not had to deal with prior. They were small fish before. No longer were they a small band of insurgents acting as a thorn in the Emperor's side. They were now a genuine threat. For the longest time, the Rebellion was trying to get the Empire to notice them, to take them seriously. And not only this, but also to show the galaxy that the regime was not invincible. But now they had succeeded, and it was now time to fortify for the Empire's response. They had their attention. Palpatine dispatched Lord Vader, who led the entire Imperial military to address the Rebellion. Just weeks prior on Scarif, the Rebellion would only get a taste of open combat when the Empire actually engaged with them. On the beaches on Scarif, they were able to use clever bomb placement and radio tactics to make it seem as though their numbers were far larger than they actually were. But when the Imperial garrisons were deployed, it was gun versus gun in the sand. And when it came down to it, the rebel forces were found wanting. The rebels were wiped out far more quickly than they had anticipated. Of course, we acknowledged their main mission wasn't to win the battle, but to get the Death Star plans to the fleet overhead. However, the Battle of Scarif proved to the Rebellion that they would never actually win a head-on confrontation against the Empire. Scarif had been proof enough for that. But there was in fact a quick fix which existed out in the reaches of space. From the dust of the Clone Wars, thousands, if not millions of battle droids lay in wait. A private army for anyone brave enough to claim. In our video about what happened to the droids following the Clone War, we mentioned how not every battle droid was melted down. Many of them remained in abandoned factories and warehouses. Scrappers and benefactors sold small armies of B1s as cheap and plentiful muscle for warlords in the Outer Rim. Where the rebels had to get their hands on these factories or warehouses, there are benefits that they would enjoy. Battle droids were cheap to produce and also to acquire. Their technology was also antiquated by the time of the Galactic Civil War, and it had gotten to the point where sellers were practically giving them away. The Rebellion not only could have feasibly gotten these troops, but also easily, acquiring several legions of troopers on a budget. And since they were just droids, the Rebellion wouldn't need to worry about the cost of food, shelter, or other provisional methods of their army, saving even more resources. Not to mention having battle droids on behalf of real soldiers meant that the rebels would actually save the lives of their people. Actual casualties would be drastically reduced, thus increasing morale and keeping numbers high. But most important of all, the Alliance would finally be on equal footing with the Empire. With an army of B1s marching to the front lines of war, the Alliance would stand toe-to-toe with their adversary. It should also be taken into account that the Stormtroopers had never fought against the battle droids and would take a great deal of time to coordinate. By this time, nearly all Clone Wars veterans had been phased out of the Imperial military, leaving only new recruits from a fresh generation. These Stormtroopers did not fight in the Clone Wars and would not have trained against battle droids as the clones had. Battle droids seemed to actually work marvelously against Stormtroopers. Wedge Antilles actually noted that they eviscerated the Stormtroopers by the battle droid ambush. The troopers simply didn't know how to fight against an enemy that was not afraid of them whatsoever. They had never fought against a droid. They were unrelenting. They did not hesitate. They were brutal. But with all of that said about the clear benefits, why didn't the Rebellion use these battle droids? Well, let's begin with more practical and tactical reasonings. First off, the use of a droid army ran counter to the rebels' main approach to combat, an approach that allowed them to destroy the Death Star. But while the individual stormtroopers were not veterans of the Clone War, and the generals that belonged to the Empire were, and it would not take long for them all to formulate a strong counterattack. They even had all of the old Clone Wars data disks on subject, and would have trained their troops accordingly. If you remember what we said about droids being antiquated technology earlier, the Empire had superior tech power as well, which means that they would have countermeasures such as ion blasters or EMP bombs to take out large swaths and quantities of the droids in a blink of an eye. And even if the rebels tried to use their slippery tactics with the droids instead of normal soldiers, having a massive droid army does not lend itself well to being able to move on the fly. Droids were effective when deployed in overwhelming numbers, and unless they were specialized units, they weren't exactly stealthy or fast. Hit and run tactics run counter to the B1 and the B2's natural design. Not to mention the rebels heavily relied on quickly evacuating whatever base of operations they were currently occupying whenever the Empire caught on to their trail. This is how they survived. They ran. And you can't necessarily run very easily with an entire army of battle droids. It's not as though they could simply dig in and entrench themselves in a location with an entire legion protecting them. The Empire would simply resort to an orbital bombardment then. Their technology was still superior. And speaking of that, another problem comes with the droid factories. The Empire is keenly aware of every place in the galaxy where the Separatists have factories. While the Rebels managed to get the Mon Calamari ships re-outfitted to be battle-worthy, what the Rebels lacked was the strength to blockade a system and actually hold out against a naval assault. Assuming the rebellion didn't just reactivate the factories and chose instead to buy their droids on the black market, the Alliance didn't have the money to keep up replenishing an army like that, even if the droids were insanely cheap. The rebels barely had enough resources to keep their people fed, and relied on sponsors and benefactors from allied systems to donate them weapons and supplies. While yes, their support increased massively following the Battle of Yavin, they were still very much rebels. Bottom line for the rebellion, a droid army was neither tactically advantageous, nor was it cost effective. But now we come to the real glaring reason why the droids would never be allowed in the Alliance, and that is because of post-Clone War anti-droid sentiment. Following the end of the last war, the galaxy was left with, should we say, a sour taste in their mouth when it came to Class 4 droids. Class 4 meaning droids built for warfare. In fact, they were outright outlawed under the Empire, a decision that the public praised the Empire for making. There began to grow a fierce hatred for droids. This was mostly due to the despicable actions of the Separatists. Originally, the Confederacy of Independent Systems wanted independence from the Republic, wanting to separate due to taxation reasons, lack of representation in the Senate, and a clear unbalanced support of the core world systems versus the outer rim systems, and clear favoritism. But as the war went on, under the control of greedy leaders, and of course Dooku, the Confederacy became extremely corrupt. They committed unspeakable acts against sentient life, testing bioweapons against primitive populations, endorsing slavery, and committing both genocide and war crimes with wild abandon. Now, while the Republic's hands were not clean either, Palpatine controlled all the propaganda, and made sure that the Separatists were squarely seen as mustache-twirling villains. And face, or should I say faceplate, the villain that the people saw were the battle droids. Through the eyes of a young Din Djarin, as he witnesses the B2 supers destroy his people, his parents, and nearly him too if he were not rescued by the Mandalorians. This is how people remembered the Clone Wars. The droids were terrifying to the common person. They were unthinking, unfeeling machines of war. They could not be bought or bargained with like a real soldier. They followed programming, and did not even hesitate if they were to murder children. The Rebel Alliance needed to ensure that they remained seen as the good guys. That is where they were going to win the war, with the people of the galaxy. And they could not do that with the battle droids. And that brings us neatly to our last point, which is the heart of the people. The Alliance heavily relied on the sympathy from the planets that surrounded them. They didn't want to fight with machines because they needed everyone to see that they were willing to put their own lives on the line for freedom. Hiding behind an army of droids was no way to inspire the people. The martyrdom and sacrificial service of the rebels showed in their heart. It showed that they were not afraid of the Empire, and that they would die to prove that it was fallible. This was the hope that would shake the galaxy out of despair and apathy, when a group of rebels are publicly executed, but the Alliance continues to fight, and people take note. The Empire's iron fist was strong, but the resolve of free will was stronger. The heart of the galactic population was a priceless commodity to the rebels, and it was the only way that they restored the Republic. While this may come at the expense of winning individual battles, it was all in the purpose of making a lasting change in the hearts of trillions. And that, my friends, was the brilliant reason why the Rebel Alliance did not use battle droids. As always, if you enjoyed the video, a like would help, and as always, may the Force be with you.